just get started. Hopefully my internet will survive. Okay. All right, I think that we are live now. So we're here talking about Antony and Cleopatra. We have Suki Waldenberger with us and also Samantha Fitch. So we will talk about this play. So who wants to start? Crickets. Does anyone want to, do either of you guys want to give like a recap of what happened in history? And then we can kind of tie the play back into the historical events, because this is one of the ones that's based on actual events, at least to some extent.
Right. I don't know if Suki wants to go, but I know I probably can't do a very good job because I feel like it's so complex and long. Suki, do you have a preference of doing it?
It doesn't matter. I mean, yes, of course, it's based on actual historic characters, but the legends and the stories and the assumptions about, especially Cleopatra herself, are so rampant that it's really hard to distinguish actual history from the stories, you know. And it's definitely what Shakespeare was working off of, were the legends, right? That people already knew, the stereotypes and the assumptions that they had about this foreign queen. Though, I mean, it obviously is these are historical characters who did exist and more kind of sort of did what what was in the play.
Well, yeah, and on that note, I kind of wondered where Shakespeare was getting his information. I don't know if it was like an ancient source like Plutarch, or if it was, like you said, just more of the legends about it. But I think, yeah, definitely Cleopatra, but also Antony. Like, he was such a very rich character, whether you read it from historical sources or you know, see him depicted in many different time periods during this time. So, you know, whether it's Antony with Caesar or Antony with Octavian or Antony with Cleopatra. So I think between the two of them, there's quite a bit of rich material to go on.
And this is, I mean, an educated person at this time would have read the, you know, original Latin or Greek stories.
I'm sure, right? Yeah.
Though how much Shakespeare could have read is a matter of debate. He didn't have the sort of noble or upper class education that that his patrons would have had. So he probably got the stories from a translation.
Well, I did read, or maybe the intro video said that Plutarch's Lives was published in 1579. So likely he had read that, and that's
Right.
where he got.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. And I know Plutarch does a really good job of being pretty succinct, but also kind of thorough as far as the story of Antony or the story of Caesar, and their complicated and changing and dynamic roles in all of these, you know, dramatic events that were going on.
Well, and that's one of the things when I was reading the history, that it is really convoluted. They're all connected these weird ways, like Octavia. Octavia. Yes. Their names are all different, right? They're the same.
And they're all sort of related to each other, or they're related to marriage because of their alliances and their change alliances. And so it's really
right.
Which would have made perfect sense to Elizabethans, right? And the whole sort of tangled history of European royalty.
Yeah, because I was like, I did not well, and it wasn't depicted in the play, but she was pregnant with her previous husband's child when she married Mark Antony, and he had kids. Then she raised all of his kids from all of his other wives.
She raised all the kids, and he had kids from Fulvia and of course Cleopatra, and there's
And his first wife, maybe not. We don't know, I guess. Antonia Hybrida is what Wikipedia calls her.
right, yeah,
Just crazy.
that is.
But yeah, and then how they were all, because Octavia's brother, who was just Caesar, and this was Octavian, right?
Yeah.
He was married to her, to someone's, like, it was just weird. They were all married to each other and whatever, like, because Cleopatra had a kid with Octavian's adopted dad, right? Because he adopted Octavian to take
Kid with
over.
Julius Caesar. She had a kid.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's just all this weird history that I feel like it would take me forever to wrap my brain around it.
Yeah, it is weird, and it is or complex. So, and I think Antony's first wife actually wasn't Fulvia. I think it was a member of the Caesar family. But it's funny too how they, I think also because unfortunately a lot of times they didn't live very long, so they took the opportunity to use these like marriages as like if they're changing dynamics with each other. So kind of like getting married to Octavia, right? I mean, that was a marriage of convenience to seal their alliance so that, you know, Octavian felt comfortable with Antony not betraying him, which he sort of did anyway, but, you know.
Yeah.
And that's because Cleopatra is so alluring. I mean, that's her defining characteristic is she's this sort of supernaturally attractive and I literally mean attractive as in pulling people to her, right? That you know, is as if he couldn't help himself, which of course is always a male excuse for bad behavior in that way. But you know, this was written by a man, and this is one of the this is how Cleopatra has been portrayed, as this almost like a siren, right? You can't resist her. One look and you're gone. Because, I mean, do you think that Antony meant to be, I mean, when he marries Octavia, does he mean it?
I doubt it. I think, you know, and I think Shakespeare portrayed this too, that it was much more of a relief for Antony to have a way for Caesar, Octavius Caesar, to have faith in him and form an alliance with him. And, you know, Octavia is kind of portrayed as a little bit of an opposite of Cleopatra, right? In that she's not, she's more of an upright, you know, proper Roman wife. And Antony's character throughout history seems like he would have jived a lot more with Cleopatra and her, you know, love of luxury. And what was it? They had a group that was called something. I forget what it was called. The Inimitables or something like that, where they all just like partied and lived, you know, these lavish lifestyles. So I think that his marriage was much more a marriage of convenience for him. But I also think he's always portrayed Antony as being a very loving person. So perhaps, you know, he had love for Octavia as well, just a different kind of love.
Well, and my really, you know, great source of Wikipedia says that he divorced Octavia to marry Cleopatra at some point. I don't know if that's accurate or not. Do you guys know? I feel like, you know, I want to get the dish on what was going on with
Oh, and I think I don't know if I can answer that correctly, but I think that that's what they were partly arguing about, is that like Antony did all these things in Egypt when he was there that were like illegal. So he was gifting Cleopatra all of these territories and their sons, all of this, and he made her, you know, queen, and he did all this stuff and married her. But that wasn't like according to Roman law at all. So I think that was their argument on the other side, is you didn't really do anything legally. So yeah, and I didn't hear, or I missed it if they said that, or if that's true that he divorced Octavia, but I know that he married Cleopatra in whatever, you know, capacity you do over in Alexandria or over in Egypt where he was.
Well, one of the things that Shakespeare does is compress all of the activities, right?
Yeah.
Of the actions, because this took place over a longer time period, and she bore him children, and so, you know, that takes a little while.
Yeah.
And you know, I also don't know if he actually divorced Octavia or to marry Cleopatra, but he certainly would have wanted to legitimize any children he had. You know, I don't know what was in, I don't know how they thought this was going to work out in the back of their mind, but you know, as in many of Shakespeare's plays, the men are very concerned about succession, right? And sons to follow, and creating a dynasty, or at least a lineage. So his family would have been important to him in that way, though of course these children don't show up in the play.
Right. Although there was some reference at the end where she looked in his face and said that she saw the sun and the moon in his eyes. And the twins, their second names were Sun and Moon. So it was like this, after when I was reading with my little quick reference, I was like, oh my gosh, there was a reference to the kids. Might not have been at all, but it was really interesting to me that was in the play, and that her children's middle names or whatever were Sun and Moon.
Yeah, that was probably a good catch. Yeah, and I think that's a good point about, you know, legitimizing the children. And I, in both Plutarch, from what I remember, and in Shakespeare, it does seem like all of this was really driven by Cleopatra. And who knows if that's, you know, just the story that's come down, because we don't want to blame Antony for everything. But it seems like this move to marry her, this move to give lands and territories to their kids and legitimize them, was really just the push for by Cleopatra. Just like the last battles were, you know, supposedly her command and her direction, and part of the reason why Antony lost.
Which, that's interesting, because, and going back even a little, you know, back to the history, Fulvia was like a political partner with Mark Antony. She was a very powerful female in Rome and caused a lot of problems between Antony and Caesar, from what I read. But she was very powerful in her own right. So Mark Antony did marry also for that political edge, for whether it's financial or whatever. There was a lot of that too. So it's interesting to kind of see what's going on in all of those, see from all these different angles.
Well, and that's, I mean, that's what marriage was for, in especially in the nobility and the higher levels of politics, right? I was just thinking about this for, can't remember why it came up, but that the sort of development of the idea of romantic love as being a guide to behavior is really recent. And in fact, it was exactly the opposite. You know, people still fell in love all the time. You find that all the way back, you know, in all kinds of art. But it's usually, it ends in tragedy. You know, if you allow yourself to be swept away and, you know, guided by your hormones, essentially, and you throw away your family, and you throw away your position, and you throw away your friends, and you know, you just, which is literally what Anthony is doing, right? He is just giving up everything that he had, and he had a lot, you know,
Yeah.
but he gave it all up because of his uncontrollable passion for this one woman. And not just him. I mean, she's a serial Roman seducer, right? But it's, you know, that's dangerous to let that happen, to not be control, you know, not plan your alliances.
Well, and it's interesting, Suki, that you said that, because you know, in the play there were the triumvirate, which they don't mention. I don't know that they use that word in the play, but between Caesar and Antony and the other guy, what was his name? Lepidus. Yes. They was like the world was divided into thirds, and they had a piece. Like he was not just, you know, some guy high up. He was like, he owned a third of the world. It's kind of crazy to think that these three guys had that much power, that they owned a third of the world. Well, that they knew of anyways.
Sure.
So to see him throw, like losing it all, it's so dramatic and so tragic that and you kind of see that at the end where he's saying like, here was I, and now I, you know, I've just failed my reputation. It's all gone. I've lost it all. And to realize how high the stakes really were and how much he lost it's hard to even comprehend that.
Well, and that's what makes it so appealing to watch, right? The higher you go, the more fascinating it is to see the fall.
Yeah, and like you were saying too, with the idea of falling in love like he did, and it happened to be not like with a commoner, right, but with a very powerful female, but she was also, you know, the other to the Romans. So I think they were even more scandalized, because here's this, you know, this woman who is part of the territories that they rule and that they consider far inferior to them, controlling everything that's going on from Julius Caesar all the way to, you know, the end of Mark Antony. And so it's also probably was very alarming to them as well.
Well, and she's definitely a symbol of the other, right? Sort of the exotic. We talked about this way back when we were talking about The Tempest, and how that sort of female energy is aligned with nature and is uncontrolled and dangerous. And she's all of those things in this play. You know, she's capricious and, you know, vain, and all of the slanders aimed at women are wrapped up in her.
But also that allure that they just can't not focus on. Like they're really quite obsessed with it, right? Just like with the other, you know, whether it's British imperialism or Cleopatra and the Romans, where it's like they're terrified of it, but at the same time, they're so drawn to it. And yeah, that was definitely Cleopatra to a T. And then all, like you mentioned in the beginning, all of the legends and stories we have after it. And even, you know, you can see our evolution of the ideas through depictions in plays and in Hollywood and things like that. So, but I thought this production was interesting. I thought their casting was interesting, and the way that the actress portrayed her character was interesting too.
Yeah, did either of you watch the pre-show? The little 30-minute before?
I don't think I did. No.
So they did an interview with the actress who played Cleopatra. And it was fascinating. So she was in Cleopatra back in 93. So this version was from 2014, and she was in Cleopatra in 93 as one of the two female servants, I guess, her companions.
Mhm.
And so she said she always just looked up to the actress that played Cleopatra at that time. And so it meant a lot to her. And she was talking about how, which this is a completely different topic, but it was so interesting how it intersects. We've talked about this over and over again, how these plays somehow just intersect with where we are. Even though they would have had no way to predict the way that things would have gone this summer. It's really interesting to see that. But she was saying how in 1993, playing that character, she would looked up at Cleopatra and could not see a future in which she as a Black woman would be able to play that role. So how amazing is it to see her in that role and really owning it? And it was really neat to see.
Yeah.
And that just added, for me, I'm all about, if I read a poem or something, I want to read all about the author and I want to know what they were feeling when they wrote it. I want to get to know them. And so getting to know just one of the actresses on the stage, it just adds that depth to me. It adds more meaning to it because you see her come out in that character too, and that research that she did and that history that she had come to play. It's really neat to see.
It is interesting because, I mean, obviously it historically ought to be played by a Black woman. Even if, I mean, Cleopatra, the historical character, is a descendant of the Greek rulers, the Ptolemies. But who knows at that point how intermixed they were with the actual inhabitants of Egypt and northern Africa. But still, as the character, she's representing, like we said, the other, this exotic country on the edge of the Roman Empire. And so, having a played by a Black woman just adds to the dimension of the character, as well as, of course, broadening the scope of of the company itself. And I do think that there's been a lot of strides made in opening up Shakespeare to characters or to actors who, you say it was 93.
Mm-hmm.
So what, 27 years ago or something like that? Couldn't even imagine.
It's really cool. Well, and it's interesting because talking about that idea of the other, one of the things that the little guy in the intro that I had posted on the site said was to look for the pairs and everything and the way things are set off in pairs. So there's two doors, there's two, Caesar's one and Antony's the other. And Antony kind of goes back and forth between the two worlds, but there's a very clear separation between Cleopatra's world and the Roman world, even just if you look at that in the, it's just very pronounced. And they're able to do that, I think, because they can cast such a wide variety of people.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of it all being just, just the white faces that we think of.
I saw the National Theater version. They showed that early in the summer as part of that National Theater at Home. Ralph Fiennes played Antony. So that was different. But in that, I don't know, in that production, I thought that Cleopatra was, well, they really played up her sort of mercurial personality. She would zip back and forth from hysteria to being serious and thoughtful, and then back to being this hysterical woman throwing her clothes around and stomping around the stage, kind of like a child. It's interesting how the character can be developed in different ways. I guess that's directorial and actorial choices, being made to bring that sort of ancient character into the modern world.
Yeah.
And I felt like this actress did a good job, which I wish I'd watched the interview, because you're right. I think it adds depth, and you can kind of see where she's come from. But I thought she did a good job at not just being the manipulative, you know, like you said, mercurial Cleopatra. She was in a lot of ways very strong and self-assured, although completely obsessed with controlling Anthony. But I thought I appreciated that aspect of it, because I've seen other, you know, productions where Cleopatra doesn't have that sort of strength. I think, like that inner strength, you know, that confidence in herself and her ability to be a ruler.
Yeah, it's possible to play this play as the, you know, the woman who takes a good man down, which I think is really one-sided and very, you know, doesn't have a lot of depth to that, but it could happen. And this play has been sort of, I think, presented that way. Once again, going back to the past of, you know, what is, how do these plays reflect the present, right? Not paying Cleopatra enough, giving her enough credit for the fact that she's a strong queen who's running her own country and has for a long time at this point. I can't remember how old she actually was, but she's no spring chicken.
Yeah, and you know what, that's something that's interesting. So because you mentioned that in the video that I watched, it wasn't, the other intro was not connected to Stratford. And so one of the things he said was basically, he said, Shakespeare blamed the whole thing on Cleopatra, and we don't really get that as much in the Stratford production. But I could definitely see how that would come out. But it's really interesting because we do have this crazy view of women, this strong ruler. I mean, Octavia was a very strong woman. Not the first wife, the third wife, I guess, of Antony the second. I don't know which one it was. The one who died in the play. She was also very strong. These were very strong women who had a lot of influence. And Octavia was one of the few women in the Roman Empire who were not under male rule. She got to have her own finances and all those kinds of things. So it's really interesting that there's all these strong women in this play, and they're all just kind of like, well, you're better off that she's dead, you know, and then Octavia is just kind of this secondary, yeah, well, we'll marry her to appease you. And then she kind of tries to make this overture, and the brother, Caesar, is kind of like, oh, you are so deceived. That scene where she's like, no, say it isn't so. He's not with Cleopatra again. Just like this helpless female that doesn't know what's going on. And so it's interesting that he took that.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, you're so right. And I noticed that too. And I thought maybe, you know, part of that was making maybe those like diametrically opposed pairs or something, or making her the foil to Cleopatra, because in the play she was definitely very proper, demure, you know, and kind of boring. But when you read about her, when she got to, you know, she followed Antony when she heard about this, you know, nonsense of him and Cleopatra, and she went there herself, and then she made people feel sorry for her by basically not eating, losing a lot of weight whenever she saw Antony pretending to be so in love and crying and weeping. And she got all of these men to like implore Antony, like, what are you doing? You know, like, what are you doing to her? And making him feel awful, even though he really just wanted to be with Cleopatra. And so that's so, you know, that's just another side of her where, like you said, she obviously had some power and knew how to use it. And she wasn't just a passive character in the whole story. And so you're right, you have all of these powerful women manipulating the situations. But on the other hand, I think a lot of it, even in Plutarch, was maybe partly there to show how, helpless these men are. Like these women just ruin things for Antony. So yeah.
Well, and I found it really fascinating. And Suki, we've talked in previous plays about that he was writing the play because Elizabeth was queen. And I believe when this came out, James was king.
Had taken the throne.
Yeah, so we no longer have a female ruler who has to pacify, maybe, I don't know, but it just makes it seem like women are just off the wall. I mean, she's emotional, she's like, tell me what the other woman looks like, and all of these things that you would think, I mean, and maybe that's just a modern perception that a strong woman wouldn't do that, but it's interesting that one of the female characters that is said to be one of his most well-developed female characters is also this irrational kind of creature.
Yeah, I mean, Shakespeare's a man of his time, of course, and he's writing for, an audience that has certain expectations. England had been ruled by a queen for a very long time, but she was an aberration for sure, and she knew it. She knew, I'm a prince in a weak woman's body or something like that, she says. So I think I think that people who stage these plays today, have to work around that somehow. You have to be able to cope with or deal with different cultural expectations about men and women. Shakespeare's justifiably celebrated because he does write complex characters and complex female characters in many of his plays, which you don't find a lot of. So he's light years ahead of most of his contemporaries, but that doesn't mean that he's got 21st century sensibilities about gender.
Right. Well, and what was interesting, and I don't know if this is always played this way, but even though she was kind of all over the place, there was really a sense of not knowing where their loyalties lay. Antony would question her, she would question him, and it was never really clear. It felt like a lot of that uncertainty and that irrational kind of behavior was due to that, to not having confidence about where his loyalty lay. And it took him killing himself for her to realize that he really did love her, which was kind of crazy there at the end.
Well, it is that sort of toxic relationship of, well, I'll make him jealous and then he'll really want me, playing games. Mm-hmm. And she fakes her death. Right. Oh, that'll make him come running back. That's not a good sign in a relationship.
Yeah, no, things aren't going to go well from there. But I think also, just realizing the time period, which is fascinating to me, about how great a distance these people traveled, and how that did affect their relationships, not just between men and women, but also between the men who were, like you said, the triumvirate, who were driving this world. And when you are gone for so long and you're so far away and you're talking to other people and you have to make deals with other people and you have to trust each other, it's a really hard thing. And I think it's just kind of fascinating for me to think about it in this time period, because it's just so different. I mean, we have Zoom, right? So it's not like people are thousands of miles away making deals on your behalf and you have no knowledge of it until a letter gets to you, months later. So
yeah.
Right.
Well, and that is so Antony leaves for Rome, or leaves, to conduct his business, and who knows if you're going to see him again, right? And who knows if he's going to get distracted by someone else or marry someone else. But yeah, you're right. It's a very, I mean, that's why marriages were so important as for treaties and for to making relationships, because you have someone there as a reminder or as a connection, someone who's going to, I'm thinking back to Blanche from King John, and she gets married off to the King of France, and then, well, who am I supposed to root for when they go to war, right? And at least, and of course, like a good woman would, is expected to do in the Elizabethan time, she chooses her husband. But still, she's this English presence in the French court, reminding, sort of connecting those two political units, I guess.
Yeah.
Which makes, I mean, and if that's important, then when Antony leaves and they're not married, you know, she has no formal or legal claim on him, just passion, which, you know, you
And
can't
her
trust.
children who aren't in
What?
the play, but her children who aren't in the
Right.
play at that point.
But not in the play
Right.
where, you know, he leaves and, well, she said, well, how do I know that he's still thinking about me?
Right. Yeah, and it's, you know, just I don't know why this came back to my mind, but just when looking at the history, what's interesting is that all those kids, a lot of them got killed off after this all happened. So Caesar's son with Cleopatra was killed. Some of Antony's sons were killed, I believe, just because Caesar didn't want that, I guess, that competition for the title. And loyalties, as we even saw in the play, loyalties are all over the place. The one character who goes over to the other side and then comes back, what was his name? Do you guys remember? I don't remember. The soldier who played King John when we looked at King John. See, I remember his face, but I don't remember his name. But he's the whole time thinking, okay, where is my better place to be, right? Like, I want to be loyal to Antony, but I got to get out of here because this is getting crazy. And he goes over to the other side and then dies because he just feels like he walked away from his honor by going over to the other side.
Right.
So that's really interesting. And then there was something, the guy that came at the very end who was talking to Cleopatra, when I was reading the histories, and I don't forget his name too, but he did something really bad to Antony at some point in real life. That name came up when I was reading his history, and he did something that wasn't, I don't remember what it was. It's 7:13, so my brain is.
Yeah, no, I can't do that either. But I know you're right that there were so many, even with the triumvirate. So this was the second, I think, triumvirate, and it seems like it never lasts. You can't trust anybody. And then you don't just have the three men, right? You have all the men that they're friends with. And it's like to make the triumvirates even, they all decided on who they could kill. Like, you know, who do I get to kill if we're gonna make this pact? And some of them gave up like some of their own family members and their own friends, just for this power. So yeah, it was definitely a world where you couldn't trust anybody. I mean, trust was really hard to come by. And if you did trust people easily, you were probably not very smart to do so.
You're gonna regret it.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
I know that Stratford chose these plays to comment on modern circumstances. And one of the things that they wanted to examine was leadership. And what happens when you have a leader who doesn't lead, who allows himself to be distracted by, in this case, Cleopatra, or leaders who want power more than good. How can you trust them?
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and that's what we see with all of these three, Caesar, Lepidus, and Antony, is they're all thinking about their own future, their own situation. We don't really have, Antony's not really concerned about the guy that deserts him. He sends him his gold after him, but that's, it's not, we don't see that, like, I'm fighting for the good of my people. It's, I'm fighting for what I want.
Yeah.
Which is really it's really interesting there.
Well, and if this is a commentary on, our times right now, I think, yeah, Antony is a pretty appropriate character to look at, because he did have a lot of people who followed him and really loved him, and he was but he was very driven by his own satisfaction and gratification, and that didn't always even have anything to do with this country. I mean, sometimes it was just that he wanted to lounge around having lavish dinner parties with 10 different courses and not worry about what was going on, not worry about his duties that he should be following. And I think that was part of the concern of Octavius Caesar, is that he's over there, and a lot of people said it was like, the talk of the town, that Antony's just kind of over there enjoying himself, and not paying attention to what he was sent there to do, and that his loyalties were perhaps laying with the East instead of with Rome.
And once again, that the idea of the East is this sort of luxurious, over the top, almost louche, they indulge themselves, and it's very not Roman, right? The Roman ideal is to deny yourself and
stoicism, and
yeah, exactly. Sacrifice yourself for the good of the whole of the empire, right? And here you have Cleopatra lounging on silks and having slaves feed her, and perfume, and yeah, it's a real betrayal of Roman family values.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because with the description that comes forward in the description of the ship, when he talks about how the ship was, the sails were scented with perfume, which I thought, well, that's an interesting description, but he really is bringing that out. And then the feast with the 12 men and 8 boars or something, or 10 men and 8 boars or something like that they roasted, it was such an excess.
Yes.
So that makes sense. I didn't catch that.
It is, and excess is a good word to describe it. Is, it's indulgent. And really, I mean, we think of like Rome as having these orgies and eating lark's tongues and things like that. But especially in the Republic, the Roman Republic, the values are very ascetic, and you suffer for the good of all. And that's absolutely, Antony has completely turned his back on that.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction too, that the time period that we're in is the sort of the Republic, those notions are still there. It hasn't completely devolved into
right
imperial.
Right. Yeah, Rome is going to head into its own.
It's going there right
yeah.
now. Yeah, but I think, yeah, you're right that it is considered foreign and lavish, luxurious and wasteful and dangerous, but also attractive, and so they there's this
super comfy.
There's this sort of this obsession with thinking about it and with imagining what that must be like, which is probably part of the obsession with imagining Antony's time there with Cleopatra. And maybe we can draw parallels to modern times as well, where you're trying to understand something that when you when you see someone like a leader doing things like Antony that are completely opposed to your values, but you're also kind of fascinated, like you want to watch it, you want to follow it, and kind of see or understand like what this is all about.
It's almost like I was thinking of, those like celebrity magazines, and oh, who's getting a divorce now, and that
Yeah.
kind of vicarious enjoyment of once again the high being brought low.
Mhm.
And so, it'll pack the theaters.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I'd love to see a production of this done in sort of authentic Elizabethan production, because what did Cleopatra look like being played by a boy in Elizabethan outfit, costuming?
Uh-huh.
That would be interesting.
I can't imagine.
That was, so one of the benefits, I guess, of watching the pre-show version is you get the live feed along with it. And there were multiple comments about that. Who played this? Who played Cleopatra in the original version? They know the actor who played Antony, but there's no record. And they're like, how could, this, with this depth of character, how could a young boy have played this character? And
Right.
interesting to think about that. And there, with all of the, there was a lot of innuendo and different things that they brought forth in the Stratford version. So thinking about how that would work with all males in that time is interesting.
It would be a fascinating, I know that they did, I can't remember which play it was, on Broadway, or it was probably off Broadway somewhere, but where it was an all male cast, it was lit with candles. It was entirely, as authentic as they could make it. And it'd be interesting to see, because it's very, very, very different from watching a modern production with, an adult woman playing Cleopatra. I did see, I watched a version of Measure for Measure that was done by the Globe Theatre in England. And the female characters were played by male actors. But boy, it was the best drag I've ever seen, because I had to look it up, and I'm like, wait a minute, it says the actress's name is David. Who is this? And
well, I can imagine that they really had it down to a T, right? Like if that's what you do, and that's what you are used to and being cast as. I know, yeah, I would love to see that, but
yeah.
Well, and part of it is the suspension of disbelief, right? You're in a theater, so you will accept unrealities without questioning them, because it's part of the just the act, it's part of the experience of the theater. But it's not something that we're used to, so it would be very interesting to see.
Right. And I mean, we look at it from we have TV and we have movies and all of these special effects, so it's hard. We're used to everything just being done for us, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to think about it very hard. So, even my kids, the things that entertained me when I was a kid, they're like, what? What is this? This is ridiculous, Mom. You can see the strings, like stuff like that, movies from the 80s. And just imagining, for them, it probably was like, maybe they couldn't tell the difference, because that's all they had. They didn't have female actors at all. So it wouldn't have even been, they wouldn't have thought,
no,
they would live with a female actor.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's another nod to Shakespeare too, is that he had such rich storylines and dimension to his characters. And so you don't need a lot of those things that we find in our modern cinema, I guess, Hollywood, because he really does a nice job in really getting you captivated by the story, so that you're not so distracted by you know, the surroundings. Really.
Absolutely. I mean, well, that's why they're still being done.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it doesn't, you can strip away the cultural assumptions, you can strip away the conventions of theater, and the story is still compelling, no matter what its context is in. And there's been some weird contexts for various Shakespeare productions of Shakespeare.
Well, and it's interesting because you say that, and watching the whole play, it didn't even dawn on me. They had a bed in the one scene. There were not that many props.
Mm.
There was not a lot going on. It was but the story was all there, just in the script. It wasn't in the extra stuff. It was just in the words, and that is, I didn't even notice that. So.
Yeah. Can you imagine our movies nowadays with just a bed? I mean, you know, for what, 2.5 hours, however long it was. Yeah. So it's quite different. And he's really, I think that really shows his genius for playwriting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This was a really neat one to watch. I think I would like to do a little bit more study of the historical, what's actually going on and who the people are, and then watch it again so that I could because I feel like there's probably a lot of connections there that I missed just because I'm not as familiar with that time period. So.
Well, once again, this would have been a play that would have had to have worked on different levels because you have different people in the audience, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, you would have people sitting in the seats, masked, who had read Plutarch in the original, right? Whose, you know, education consisted of this classical Renaissance examination of Greece and Rome. But then you've got the groundlings who are there for the spectacle or the
body humor sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, do you all have anything else you want to add? We've got just two minutes left.
No, I thought it was a great production. I really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, it's been really amazing to see all of the different, because we've been able to watch a couple of comedies and a couple tragedies and a couple of histories, and the one last week that was this romantic whatever it was. So it's really interesting. So next week we have our very last play, Romeo and Juliet. So this will be interesting because I think it's a story that everyone is familiar with, you know, probably for a lot of our students, maybe just from watching it on TV, but they probably read it in high school their freshman year. And so it should be interesting to see how Stratford portrays this story that we're all very familiar with. Yes. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too.
Me too.
All right. So I think I will see both of you next week.
Yep.
Yes. All right.
Well, all right. Have a good evening.
We'll see you next week for the very last one. I can't believe we're at the end.
Summer's going fast.
Yes, it is.
Good night.
Guys, have a good night. Thanks for joining me.
All right. Bye-bye.